Welcome to this journey through one of the most chilling chapters in American medical history. Tell us where you're watching from now, because this story will disturb you in a way few other accounts can. We're about to delve into a mystery that claimed dozens of lives over nearly 2 decades, where a prestigious psychiatric institution defied all ethical boundaries and left a legacy so horrifying that authorities scrambled to bury the truth. It was the year 1947. The world was recovering from the devastation of World War II, trying to rebuild shattered nations and psyches. In the remote hills of northern Pennsylvania, however, a different kind of darkness was taking root. The Ashwood Psychiatric Hospital sat like a monument to Victorian ambition on a windswept ridge overlooking the Susquehanna Valley. Built in 1889, the imposing red brick structure featured towering turrets, narrow Gothic windows, and walls 3 feet thick. Local residents had always viewed the place with a mixture of respect and unease. After all, madness required containment, and Ashwood promised to deliver that service with dignity and modern medical expertise. But something changed after the war. Dr. Marcus Wellborne arrived at Ashwood in the spring of 1946, carrying impeccable credentials from Johns Hopkins and a leather-bound journal filled with revolutionary theories about psychiatric treatment. The hospital's board of directors welcomed him enthusiastically. Pennsylvania's mental health facilities were overwhelmed with returning veterans suffering from what was then called shell shock, and Wellborne promised innovative solutions. What they didn't know was that Dr. Wellborne brought something else with him, something darker than any illness his patients carried. The Susquehanna Valley in those years existed in a strange temporal pocket, caught between the fading agricultural traditions of the 19th century and the industrial ambitions of the 20th. Small towns dotted the landscape like scattered seeds, connected by winding roads that turned to rivers of mud each spring when the snow melted from the Allegheny foothills. Ashwood Hospital dominated its ridge like a sleeping beast. The building sprawled across 5 acres, its architecture a confused mixture of Victorian Gothic and later additions that never quite matched the original vision. The central tower rose 7 stories, its clock face visible for miles. Wings extended east and west, each 3 stories tall and lined with small, barred windows that caught the morning light like empty eyes. The grounds told their own story. Once meticulously maintained, gardens had grown wild during the war years when staff shortages left them untended. Overgrown hedges created shadowy labyrinths. Ancient oak trees, their branches twisted by decades of valley winds, cast strange patterns across the lawn. A wrought iron fence surrounded the entire property, its pointed finials designed less for aesthetics than function. In the basement, accessible only through a locked stairwell from the main administration building, a series of rooms had been constructed during Ashwood's earliest years. These chambers, originally designed for hydrotherapy and other Victorian treatments, featured tile walls that could be hosed down, heavy doors with viewing slots, and drainage systems built into the floors. By 1947, these rooms had been officially abandoned. The hospital records listed them as storage. The records lied. The staff of Ashwood in those post-war years formed a small, insular community. Nurses lived in dormitories on the hospital grounds. Orderlies occupied converted servant quarters. Dr. Wellborne himself resided in the former superintendent's residence, a smaller Victorian house situated 100 yards from the main building, connected by a covered walkway that allowed him to reach the hospital without exposure to weather. Most of the staff were locals, working class men and women grateful for steady employment. The nursing director, Helen Carruthers, had served at Ashwood since 1932. She ran her department with military precision, her starched white uniform a symbol of order in a place dedicated to treating disorder. The orderlies, led by a former coal miner named Joseph Brennan, provided the physical presence necessary when patients became violent. They were good people, mostly. They believed they were doing important work. That belief would later haunt them. The patients themselves came from all walks of life. Some were wealthy families' embarrassments, quietly committed to avoid scandal. Others were veterans whose minds had shattered under artillery fire and couldn't be reassembled. Still others were simply unfortunate people who heard voices or saw visions, or couldn't stop their hands from shaking, or fell into depressions so profound they forgot how to live. In 1947, psychiatric medicine was emerging from its dark ages, but hadn't yet reached anything resembling modern understanding. Electroshock therapy was considered progressive. Lobotomies won Nobel Prizes. The line between treatment and torture remained blurry, defined more by intention than outcome. Dr. Wellborne understood this ambiguity. He exploited it. His arrival transformed Ashwood's culture. He immediately implemented what he called advanced therapeutic protocols. He requisitioned new equipment. He requested that certain basement rooms be renovated and made accessible only to senior staff. He began selecting specific patients for his specialized treatment program. The board approved everything. After all, Dr. Wellborne was brilliant, charismatic, and came with the highest recommendations. No one thought to verify those recommendations. No one wondered why a doctor of his supposed caliber would accept a position at a remote Pennsylvania facility instead of prestigious urban hospitals. No one asked what had really happened at his previous positions. The first family to raise concerns was the Morrison family from Williamsport. Their son, Thomas Morrison, had been committed to Ashwood in August of 1947 after a severe breakdown following his return from the Pacific Theater. Thomas had survived 3 years of island hopping campaigns, seen friends die in ways that erased the meaning of words like death, and made them inadequate for what he'd witnessed. He came home unable to sleep, unable to stop seeing faces in the dark, unable to believe he deserved to still be alive. His family committed him with broken hearts, believing Ashwood would heal him. For the first month, they were allowed weekly visits. Thomas seemed to be responding to treatment. He was quieter, more docile. The trembling in his hands had stopped. Dr. Wellborne assured them this was significant progress. Then the visits were restricted. Dr. Wellborne explained that Thomas had entered a crucial phase of treatment that required minimal external stimulation. The Morrisons reluctantly agreed. They wanted their son healed. In October, they received a letter from the hospital. Thomas Morrison had died of a heart attack during the night. The body had already been cremated per standard infectious disease protocols. The ashes would be available for pickup. Thomas Morrison was 23 years old. He had no history of heart problems. The letter offered no explanation for the cremation, which wasn't standard protocol at all. The Morrisons demanded answers. They were told that their son's medical records had been damaged in a storage room flood. They hired a lawyer. The lawyer was told that patient confidentiality prevented the release of any information, and that the hospital's medical examiner had certified natural causes. Case closed, but it wasn't closed. Not for the Morrisons. They began asking questions in the community. They discovered they weren't alone. The Patterson family from Danville had lost a daughter, Margaret, in September. Heart failure at 28. The Chen family from Scranton had lost a son, William, in early November. Respiratory collapse at 31. The Kowalski family from Harrisburg had lost a daughter, Anna, in mid-November. Stroke at 26. 4 deaths in 3 months, all young, all sudden, all cremated immediately, all with damaged or incomplete medical records. By December of 1947, the Morrisons had compiled a list of 7 families who had lost loved ones at Ashwood since Dr. Wellborne's arrival. The pattern was undeniable. They took their findings to the state authorities. This is where the story should have ended quickly, with immediate investigation and swift justice. It didn't. The Pennsylvania Department of Health sent Inspector Gerald Hartley to Ashwood in January of 1948. Hartley was a career bureaucrat, more concerned with paperwork compliance than substantive investigation. He spent 3 days at the hospital, reviewed the files that Dr. Wellborne provided, and interviewed staff members in Dr. Wellborne's presence. His report concluded that Ashwood was operating within acceptable standards. The deaths were unfortunate but medically explicable. Psychiatric patients, the report noted, often had underlying health conditions that weren't immediately apparent. The cremations, while perhaps premature, violated no specific regulations. Case closed, again. But Thomas Morrison's sister, Catherine Morrison, refused to accept this conclusion. Catherine was a nursing student at the University of Pennsylvania, sharp, minded, and persistent. She took a leave from her studies and returned to Williamsport with a plan. She was going to get inside Ashwood. In March of 1948, Catherine Morrison applied for a nursing position at the hospital. Her credentials were impeccable, and the hospital was perpetually understaffed. She was hired within a week, assigned to the 3rd floor ward under the supervision of Nurse Carruthers. For the first month, Catherine saw nothing obviously suspicious. The hospital ran efficiently. Patients received regular meals, medication, and basic care. The staff seemed competent and, for the most part, compassionate, but there were oddities. Certain patients would disappear for days at a time. When Catherine asked about them, she was told they were receiving advanced treatment. In the restricted basement wing, these patients, she noticed, were always young, always in relatively good physical health before their disappearance. When they returned, they were different. They were hollow. Their eyes carried a particular kind of emptiness that Catherine recognized from her pediatric rotation, where she'd cared for children who'd been severely traumatized. It was the look of someone whose self had been partially erased, leaving behind a shell that moved and breathed but no longer fully inhabited the body. Catherine began keeping notes in a small journal she hid in her dormitory room. She documented which patients disappeared, for how long, and what condition they were in upon return. The pattern emerged quickly. Dr. Wellborne personally selected patients for his advanced treatment program. These patients were always transferred to the basement wing late at night. They would be gone for anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks. Some returned, some didn't. The ones who didn't return were invariably reported as having died of natural causes. Heart attacks, strokes, respiratory failures, always sudden, always at night, always cremated immediately. Catherine realized she needed access to the basement wing. This was dangerous. The basement was restricted to Dr. Wellborne, Joseph Brennan, and 2 orderlies specifically assigned to that area. The stairwell door remained locked, accessible only with a key that Dr. Wellborne kept on his person, but Catherine had noticed something. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Dr. Wellborne attended board meetings in town. He would leave the hospital around 6 o'clock and return by 9. During these absences, Joseph Brennan carried a duplicate key. On a Thursday evening in late April, Catherine volunteered to work a double shift. When Brennan went to the staff cafeteria for his dinner break, she followed. She engaged him in conversation, flirtatious and seemingly innocent. When he stood to clear his tray, she bumped into him deliberately, apologizing profusely. The key ring in his pocket was now in her hand. Catherine waited until after midnight. The night shift was minimal, one nurse on each floor, one orderly making rounds. She knew the orderly's pattern. She had 20 minutes. The basement stairwell door was located in a service corridor near the kitchen. Catherine approached it with her pulse hammering in her ears. The key slid into the lock smoothly. The door opened silently, revealing stairs descending into darkness. She had brought a small flashlight, the kind nurses used for checking on sleeping patients. Its beam was narrow but sufficient. The stairs were stone, worn smooth by decades of use. The air grew colder with each step. A smell rose to meet her, antiseptic and something else. Something organic and wrong. The basement corridor stretched in both directions, lit by bare bulbs spaced 30 feet apart. The walls were the original stone foundation, damp and glistening. Pipes ran along the ceiling, occasionally dripping condensation that echoed in the silence. Doors lined both sides of the corridor. Most were dark wood with small viewing slots at eye level. Catherine moved to the nearest door and carefully slid open the viewing slot. The room beyond was empty, a bare mattress on a metal frame, restraint straps dangling from the frame's corners. Nothing else. She moved to the next door, also empty. The third door was different. When she slid open the viewing slot, she saw someone inside. A patient sat on the floor in the corner, rocking back and forth. Male, young, wearing only a thin hospital gown. The room was cold enough that Catherine could see his breath. She recognized him. Robert Palmer, admitted 3 weeks ago with severe anxiety. He'd been a promising law student before the war destroyed his nerves. He'd been taken to the basement 4 days ago. "Robert," she whispered through the slot. He didn't respond, just continued rocking, his eyes unfocused. Catherine moved down the corridor, checking each room. Most were empty. 3 contained patients, all in similar conditions with drawn, unresponsive, exhibiting the blank stare she'd come to recognize. At the end of the corridor, she found a different kind of door. This one was metal, newer than the others, with a more complex lock. The viewing slot had been sealed shut. Catherine tried the keys on Brennan's ring. None worked. She pressed her ear against the metal. From within came sounds, mechanical humming, water running, and something else. A rhythmic thumping, almost like a heartbeat, but wrong. Too slow, too regular. She checked her watch. 15 minutes had passed. She needed to leave, but then she heard footsteps. Someone was descending the stairs. Catherine's blood turned to ice. She looked frantically for a hiding place. There, an alcove about 20 feet back, where the corridor turned slightly. She ran to it and pressed herself into the shadows, extinguishing her flashlight. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. A light appeared, sweeping the corridor. Dr. Wellborne's voice. "I know someone's down here." The door was left unlocked. Catherine held her breath, pressed herself deeper into the alcove. Wellborne's footsteps came closer. "It's quite all right. You must be curious. Many of the staff are, though few have your courage." He was directly in front of her hiding place now. His silhouette blocked the light from the corridor bulbs. "Ah, Miss Morrison, I presume." Catherine's heart stopped. Wellborne turned toward the alcove, his flashlight beam finding her face. "Yes, I thought it might be you. You've been asking questions, making observations. You're quite clever, really." Catherine couldn't move, couldn't speak. "Would you like to see what we do here?" Wellborne's voice was calm, conversational. "I think you've earned that right. Come." He gestured toward the metal door at the corridor's end. Every instinct screamed at Catherine to run. But Wellborne stood between her and the stairs, and something in his voice suggested that running would be far worse than cooperating. She stepped out of the alcove. Wellborne smiled. He was a handsome man, she noticed distantly, 50-ish, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like someone's kindly uncle. "You see, Miss Morrison, psychiatry stands at a crossroads," he said, walking toward the metal door. Catherine followed, her legs moving mechanically. "For centuries, we've treated mental illness with superstition and cruelty. But science offers us new possibilities, new tools." He produced a different key from his vest pocket. The metal door's lock clicked open. "The question is, how far are we willing to go in pursuit of understanding?" The door swung inward. The room beyond was large, perhaps 30 feet square. Tile covered every surface, white tile, spotlessly clean, gleaming under bright overhead lights. Equipment filled the space, machines that hummed and clicked, tanks filled with liquid, wires and tubes running between various devices. And in the center of the room, a chair. It was similar to a dentist's chair, but heavier, more complex. Restraints at every point: ankles, wrists, chest, forehead. Next to it stood a large machine with dials and switches, connected to the chair by thick cables. "This," Wellborne said with obvious pride, "is the future of psychiatric treatment." Catherine found her voice. "What is it?" "Electroconvulsive therapy apparatus, modified based on my own research. But that's only the beginning." He walked to a cabinet along the wall and opened it, revealing rows of bottles and syringes. "Combined with experimental pharmaceutical interventions, we can actually reprogram the human mind." "Reprogram," Catherine repeated numbly, "erase traumatic memories, eliminate destructive behavioral patterns, create, essentially, a clean slate upon which a healthier psyche can be constructed." He turned to her, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Imagine it, Miss Morrison. Veterans returning from war, their minds shattered by horror. We could give them peace, the chronically depressed. We could give them joy, the violent. We could make them gentle." "But the deaths," Catherine whispered, "the patients who die." Wellborne's expression didn't change. "Science requires sacrifice. Not all subjects respond favorably to treatment. The human brain is remarkably fragile. Sometimes the erasure goes too far. Sometimes the body simply can't tolerate necessary voltage levels. You're killing them. I'm pushing the boundaries of human knowledge." His voice remained calm, reasonable. "Every great medical advancement has required exactly this kind of courage. Vaccination, anesthesia, antibiotics, all tested on human subjects before widespread acceptance. I'm simply continuing that tradition." Catherine's mind raced. She needed to get out. She needed to tell someone, but who would believe her? Inspector Hartley had already dismissed the family's concerns. She needed proof. "I want to understand," she heard herself say. "Show me the records. Show me what you've learned." Wellborne studied her face for a long moment. Then he smiled. "You're extraordinary, Miss Morrison. Most people, confronted with this, would react with horror and hysteria. But you want to understand. That's the mark of a true scientific mind." He walked to a desk in the corner and pulled out a thick leather journal. "My personal research log. Every subject, every procedure, every result, meticulously documented." He opened the journal, revealing pages filled with dense handwriting and sketches. Catherine saw names she recognized. Dates, descriptions of procedures that made her stomach turn. Subject 17 received 800 volts in sustained bursts over a 6-hour period. Wellborne read. Response initially promising, complete memory erasure of wartime trauma. However, subject expired 40, 8 hours post. Procedure due to cardiac arrest. Conclusion, sustained hive. Voltage protocols require more gradual implementation. He flipped through more pages. Subject 23. Pharmaceutical intervention using experimental compound 7-4 in combination with 300 volts. Subject survived but demonstrated complete personality dissolution, no longer responsive to external stimuli. Current status, vegetative. Recommendation, reduce compound concentration in future trials. Catherine felt bile rising in her throat. How many, she managed to ask. Subjects, 20. 7 so far. 11 fatalities, 8 vegetative states, 4 partial successes, 4 complete successes. He said it as casually as discussing the weather. The success rate is improving. With continued research, I'm confident we can achieve breakthrough results. This is murder, Catherine said. Wellborne closed the journal. This is progress. His voice hardened slightly. And now we come to the practical matter of what to do with you. Catherine's blood froze again. You've seen too much to simply return to your duties. Wellborne continued. And I can't risk you contacting authorities. Inspector Hartley is sympathetic to my work, but even his protection has limits if you were to make public accusations. He moved toward the chair in the room's center. So I'm going to offer you a choice, Miss Morrison. You can become Subject 28, contribute to scientific progress in a direct and meaningful way, or, he paused. You can join my research team, help me refine these procedures, use your nursing knowledge to improve subject survival rates. You're insane, Catherine breathed. I'm visionary, he corrected. There's a difference. I see possibilities others are too timid to pursue. Catherine's mind raced. She was trapped in a basement room with a madman. No one knew she was here. If she disappeared, she'd become another mysterious death, another cremated body. But then she remembered the journal. If she could get that journal out of this basement, she'd have proof. Undeniable, documented proof of everything Wellborne had done. I need time to think, she said. Wellborne nodded. Of course, this is a significant decision. He glanced at his watch. It's quite late. I'll escort you back upstairs. You have until tomorrow evening to decide. But understand, if you attempt to leave the hospital grounds or contact anyone outside, I'll know. And you'll be collected immediately. He gestured toward the door. They walked back through the corridor in silence. Catherine's mind was already forming a plan. Catherine didn't sleep that night. She knew she had one chance. The next morning, she went through her duties mechanically, waiting for the right moment. Around noon, she told Nurse Carruthers she was feeling ill and requested permission to rest in her dormitory room. Carruthers, noting Catherine's pale face and trembling hands, agreed. In her room, Catherine wrote everything down. Every detail she'd seen in the basement. Every word Wellborne had spoken. She addressed the letter to the State Attorney General's office in Harrisburg and sealed it in an envelope. Then she walked to town. It was risky. Wellborne had warned her not to leave the grounds, but she had to get the letter mailed before evening. The town's post office was a small brick building on Main Street. Catherine handed the envelope to the clerk, paid for express delivery, and walked back toward the hospital with her heart pounding. She'd done it. Even if Wellborne killed her now, the truth would emerge. But when she entered the hospital's main entrance, Joseph Brennan was waiting. "Dr. Wellborne wants to see you," he said. His face was grim. Catherine's blood ran cold. Had he been watching her? Did he know about the letter? Brennan led her not to the basement, but to Wellborne's office on the second floor. The doctor sat behind his desk, his expression pleasant but his eyes cold. "Sit down, Miss Morrison." She sat. "I'm disappointed," Wellborne said. "I gave you until evening to make your decision, yet you left the grounds during your lunch period. Where did you go? Catherine's mind raced. The pharmacy in town. I needed personal supplies. You're lying. He opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Her envelope. The postmaster is an old friend. He was kind enough to intercept this before it left town. Catherine's world collapsed. Wellborne opened the envelope and scanned the letter. His expression darkened. This is unfortunate. I had hoped you would make the intelligent choice. You can't keep this hidden. Catherine said, forcing strength into her voice. People know I'm here. If I disappear, you won't disappear. Wellborne interrupted. You'll have a tragic accident. A fall down the stairs, perhaps, or a sudden allergic reaction to medication. These things happen in hospitals. No one questions them. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the grounds. The work I'm doing here will change psychiatric medicine forever. In 20 years, they'll build monuments to my genius. A few deaths along the way are a small price for such progress. Catherine realized in that moment that she wasn't going to leave this room alive, not unless she acted. She lunged for the desk, grabbing the first thing her hand found, a heavy glass paperweight. She threw it at Wellborne's head. He dodged, but the paperweight struck the window, shattering it with a tremendous crash. Catherine ran for the door, but Brennan blocked her path. She tried to push past him, but he was too strong. His hands closed on her arms. Get her to the basement. Wellborne snapped, straightening his glasses. We'll proceed with subject 28 immediately. They dragged Catherine down the stairs. She screamed, but the walls were thick, and the afternoon shift change meant the corridors were empty. By the time they reached the basement, her voice was hoarse. They strapped her into the chair in the tiled room. Wellborne began preparing his equipment, adjusting dials and switches. I'm truly sorry it came to this, he said, not looking at her. You would have made an excellent research assistant. He approached with a syringe filled with clear liquid. And then the basement door burst open. Inspector Hartley stood in the doorway, accompanied by 4 state police officers. Step away from the patient, Dr. Wellborne. Wellborne froze, the syringe still in his hand. Catherine would later learn that her letter wasn't the only one sent to Harrisburg that week. Nurse Helen Carruthers had been keeping her own documentation, a separate record of every suspicious death, every patient who disappeared to the basement, every irregularity in Dr. Wellborne's protocols. The shattered window and Catherine's screams had finally pushed Carruthers to act. She'd driven to the state police barracks and brought them back immediately. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Dr. Wellborne's journal was seized as evidence. The basement was photographed and documented. Patients still in the restricted wing were evacuated and examined. The truth emerged slowly, like poison leaching from infected ground. Marcus Wellborne was not his real name. He was Martin Wells, a former psychiatric resident who had been dismissed from 3 hospitals for ethical violations before arriving at Ashwood with forged credentials. His revolutionary research was a combination of legitimate psychiatric techniques pushed to monstrous extremes and pure sadism disguised as science. The journal documented 31 victims, not 27, as he'd told Catherine. Some bodies had been cremated so quickly that families never knew they were gone. Some patients who'd been reported as transferred to other facilities had never left Ashwood's basement. The trial began in September of 1948 and lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Families testified about their lost loved ones. Former patients described the horrors they'd endured. Carruthers detailed the systematic cover-up. Dr. Wellborne Martin Wells showed no remorse. Even during testimony about his victims, he maintained that his work was necessary, that he was a pioneer, that history would vindicate him, The jury deliberated for 40 minutes, guilty on all 30, 1 counts of murder. Pennsylvania had abolished the death penalty in 1915, but reinstated it in 1945. Martin Wells became one of the first people executed under the new law. On February 14, 1949, at 6:15 in the morning, he was electrocuted at Rockview Penitentiary. The method of execution, electrical current delivered directly to the brain, carried a bitter irony that was not lost on those who had followed the case. His last words, according to witnesses, were, "The brain is the final frontier. Someone must have the courage to explore it." The story of Ashwood Hospital should have ended there, with justice served and a monster destroyed. But some stories have roots that run deeper than a single villain. The hospital remained open for another 37 years. The basement was sealed. Literally, the stairwell entrance was bricked over and plastered. The building underwent extensive renovations. New leadership promised reform and transparency, but the darkness never fully left. Former staff members reported strange occurrences in the years following the trial. Sounds from below the sealed basement. Lights flickering in patterns that seemed almost intentional. Patients claiming to see a man in a white coat walking corridors that no longer existed. In 1956, a construction crew broke through the sealed basement entrance during renovation work. They found the rooms exactly as they'd been left. The chair still in the center of the tiled room, equipment still humming with residual charge that shouldn't have been possible after 7 years of disconnection. The crew refused to continue work. The basement was sealed again, this time with concrete. Catherine Morrison recovered from her physical ordeal, but carried psychological scars for life. She never returned to nursing. Instead, she became an advocate for psychiatric patient rights, spending the next 40 years fighting for legislation to protect institutionalized people from abuse. The Morrison Act, passed by Pennsylvania in 1963, mandated external oversight of all psychiatric facilities and established strict protocols for experimental treatments. Helen Carruthers continued working at Ashwood until her retirement in 1968. She never forgave herself for not acting sooner, though investigators and families assured her that without her final courage, Wells might have continued his work indefinitely. She donated her entire salary from those years to a fund for the victims' families. Joseph Brennan was arrested as an accessory, but testified against Wells in exchange for a reduced sentence. He served 3 years and moved west after his release. He died in 1971, reportedly never speaking about his time at Ashwood. And 80 Galaxies S, its Gothic towers standing empty on their ridge overlooking the valley. Various developers considered converting the property into apartments or a hotel, but every project failed. Workers reported inexplicable equipment failures, accidents that defied statistical probability, and a pervasive sense of wrongness that made even the most hardened contractors refuse to continue. In 2003, a team of paranormal investigators received permission to document the abandoned building. Their footage showed empty corridors, rooms filled with decaying furniture, and acres of peeling paint. But in the audio recordings, enhanced and analyzed by multiple independent labs, distinct sounds emerged. Voices speaking in patterns consistent with plea and protest, mechanical humming, and something that might have been screaming, if screaming could come from somewhere outside normal space and time. The building was demolished in 2009. Every brick was hauled away, every pipe and wire. The foundation was excavated to a depth of 12 feet and filled with clean earth. The site is now a community park with walking trails and a small amphitheater. But locals still avoid the area after dark. The story of Ashwood raises questions that extend beyond one madman's crimes. How many patients died in institutions across America during psychiatry's primitive years? How many experiments were conducted in the name of science, but without oversight or ethics? How many families received ashes and lies instead of answers? The victims of Martin Wells remain mostly forgotten by the broader historical record. Their names appear in court documents and newspaper archives, but rarely in textbooks. They were considered damaged people even before Wells got hold of them. Veterans with shattered minds, women with depression, men with anxiety. Society had already marginalized them, making them perfect victims for someone who viewed human beings as experimental subjects. Yet each of them was someone's child, someone's sibling, someone's friend. They had hopes before trauma destroyed them. They had lives before institutions swallowed them. They deserved healing, not horror. The balance between medical progress and human dignity remains delicate. Modern psychiatric medicine has made tremendous advances, developing treatments that genuinely help millions of people. But the shadow of places like Ashwood reminds us that good intentions are not enough, that credentials and intelligence do not equal ethics, that systems designed to heal can become systems of harm when oversight fails. And perhaps most disturbingly, the story illustrates how easily evil can hide behind the mask of science. Wells genuinely believed he was advancing human knowledge. He documented his atrocities with the meticulous care of a researcher. He spoke about his victims using clinical language that stripped away their humanity and reframed suffering as data. This wasn't the evil of obvious monsters. This was the evil of educated men who convinced themselves that some lives matter less than others, that progress justifies cruelty, that their vision of the future outweighs the pain of the present. It's the most dangerous kind of evil because it wears the face of reason. To this day, if you search county death records for the year 1940, 7 in the Susquehanna Valley region, you'll find an unusual cluster of young people who died suddenly at Ashwood Psychiatric Hospital, heart attacks, strokes, respiratory failures, all cremated, all with minimal documentation. The official record calls them unfortunate casualties of existing medical conditions. The truth calls them martyrs to one man's monstrous ambition. And on certain nights, when the valley fog rises thick enough to blur the boundaries between past and present, people driving past the former hospital site report seeing lights in the empty air, lights positioned exactly where the building's windows used to be, 7 stories up in what is now only darkness and memory. If this journey through the dark corridors of medical history moved you, if you find yourself pondering the fragile line between healing and harm, then consider